Hi, welcome to BAL, Building Athletic Lifestyles. I'm Neil. This is part 7 of the Fundamentals series. If you missed any of the previous parts, there's a link down below. You can find those there. We do build on them brick by brick as we go, so try and watch those first. So today we're going to be focusing on rest periods, the time between your exercises. Again, we're going to be focusing mostly in terms of in the gym itself, looking at the muscle building, your hypertrophy and your strength gains along the way. If you've spent any time researching this yourself or had a little look around, you'll probably see some of the classic notions that were for hypertrophy. You were looking at about 60 seconds between your exercises. For strength, you were looking at closer to 180 to 300, so 3 to 5 minutes being your rest period in between. And then for endurance, you've got less than 30 seconds. Now this data is a little bit older, and some of the more recent studies coming out actually tend to prove a slightly different theory. So a recent study that came out in 2016 that involved Brad Schoenfield, in that one, they had two groups. One group rested for 60 seconds, one group rested for 3 minutes, 180 seconds. And what they found is that group that rested for 180 seconds, that they made greater degrees of muscle gains, so hypertrophy, but they also made greater degrees of strength gains. One thing that wasn't statistically significant was the difference in terms of muscular endurance. Then there was another meta-analysis that happened in 2017 as well. Meta-analysis is essentially a collection of studies. So there were 6 studies that they took, collated together, and they found that resting for longer than 60 seconds led to a greater degree of hypertrophy, muscle gain. This was dependent on exercise selection though, which is something that we'll come down to a little bit more down here. So referring to that exercise selection, like we talked about in the last video, you've got your compound, your isolation movements, the multi-joint movements, as well as the single joint movements. If you're doing heavy compound movements, you're going to place a larger degree of stress on the body. So that's when you're going to need a greater degree of time between your sets to recover before them. The reason for that is you still want to get maximum volume out of them. When we spoke before about volume, that was one of the main driving forces for hypertrophy, your muscle gain. The way I would illustrate that is if you're doing sets of heavy 5 squats or heavy triples on squats, if you do a set and then you only give yourself 30 seconds in between, you're unlikely to then be able to get the same amount of reps on that next set. So you've lost some of your volume there, volume being one of the largest driving forces for hypertrophy. So in terms of applying that to your own training itself, I would try and structure it around, if you're starting with your compound movements, those heavier lifts, things like your squats, your deadlifts that place a larger degree of stress on the body, give yourself longer rest periods then, something like 180 to 300 seconds. So give yourself that 3 to 5 minute rest if you need it. Whereas compare that to later on when you're doing your assistance or isolation work, that's when you can speed it up, keep the pace a little higher, and then go for that 60 to 120 second rest period. There are, like always, a few exceptions to this. So if you're doing paired sets or separated supersets where you essentially do antagonistic work, what that means is basically if I was doing a bicep curl and then supersetted it with a tricep extension, because the bicep's not actively working whilst I'm doing the tricep extension, it allows you to speed up the process. So if you're tight on time, that allows you to work a lot quicker, but it does mean that you don't have to rest to the same degree between the sets because you're going from a different muscle as you go. So you wouldn't do that with, say, doing deadlift and a hamstring curl because you're going to use your hamstrings in both. So you can use it to increase the intensity later in the workout if you're looking to challenge yourself to a greater degree, or you're tight on time or something like that, but you then get a little bit more of a metabolic stress, which does also lend towards hypertrophy, not as much as maybe just increasing your overall work volume would, but it is another option. However, I would isolate that more to advanced lifters, people that are more familiar with the movements themselves. If you're a beginner, don't worry about it, rather instead just try and get a little bit more volume in there. Good. As much as I've given you some guidelines in terms of times there, it's more of a benchmark to work off of. There's a sweet spot that will be dependent on you. You might recover quicker than someone else, so it's finding what works for yourself. Also, you don't need to be actually timing your rest periods. It's more of a rule of thumb to give you an idea of how long they should be. You can time them if you want, but again, I would save that more to intermediate advanced lifters. If you're a beginner, just give yourself that long enough break. Rough benchmark of that, a little over 60 seconds. If you're doing your bigger lifts, go more towards that 3 minute mark. Good. If you have any questions about rest periods, drop them down in the comments below. Make sure to like the video. Any feedback is always appreciated. Good. Next week we're going to be talking about tempo, so the speed of your movements. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, hit the little bell so you get notified when that video goes live, and I'll see you in the next one.